Hey, this is Jason Kincaid for TechCrunch TV, and I'm here with David Kirkpatrick, who is a longtime journalist, wrote The Facebook Effect, and is also the founder of Techonomy, which is having a conference in November.
Yes, thank you.
And thank you for joining us today. The topic of today, it's obviously a really sad day. Steve Jobs passed away, and we invited David to come over here. He's had quite a lot of interaction with Steve over his career, just to discuss the response that people have had and your own take on what's going on and really the impact that Steve Jobs really had on all of us. So do you want to start off talking about maybe like how often you really met Steve Jobs and some things you saw about him?
I probably first met him about 20 years ago when he got an award that Fortune presented, and then I wrote articles about Apple. I actually once interviewed him in Paris. I interviewed him in Palo Alto. I've run into him at industry events. I was at the opening of the first Apple store. I mean, I've had a lot of interactions with him, and I actually, I considered him a great figure going way back. Mm-hmm. But, it's interesting because a lot of the times when I knew him and interviewed him, Apple was basically a struggling company. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting to look back on that and how hard he was working, and he was not viewed as an iconic, amazing saint of innovation and business leadership. He was a guy who took over a very challenged company and was desperately trying to make it work. I mean, he got a $150 million loan from Microsoft when he went back, and it was fascinating for me seeing the evolution of his career. I mean, for all of us. Mm-hmm. Just one thing too that I think is so interesting is that he's kind of going out at this astonishing moment in Apple's success. I mean, by far the most successful time it's ever had. It's
most valuable company in the world.
And it's poised to pass IBM and HP as the largest tech company in revenues, which none of us could have possibly imagined would be possible. And I think it has a huge runway still to get bigger.
So looking back at how Steve, or at least the public perception, and maybe how he acted, changed over the time you first started meeting him and then through Apple's success, did you notice that over time he became, say, more confident as Apple became more successful, as he proved that he really knew what he was doing? Because obviously when he was ousted out of Apple, if you've watched interviews with him and even his Stanford commencement speech, he referred how he was very, very publicly out how he felt like he had let down the previous generation of entrepreneurs. When you first met him, when he was bringing Apple, when he had rejoined Apple, did it seem like he felt like he had something to prove?
Well, actually, I first met him when he was at Next.
Okay.
I met him in his office at Next a couple of years before Apple bought Next. And I think we've heard these stories about how dejected and depressed he was when he was ejected by Scully and the board from Apple. But honestly, in every interaction I ever had with him, without exception, he was incredibly energetic, upbeat, confident. I think it's one of the keys to his success. In this famous Stanford speech that's constantly referred to when he gave the commencement address, he talks about, don't live anybody else's life. Don't give up your ambitions and your aspirations. And really, he was an uncompromising guy. And he also talks in that speech about how, if you don't feel with every day you live that you're doing the thing you would do on the day you were dying, then you should do something else. If it was your last day on earth, would you do this thing? And I think he really lived that way. And that, in some ways, is the secret of his success and the lesson that he gives to all of us. And one thing I would say, I admire him no less than anyone. I'm in mourning, but all this talk in the last day or so about there will never be another Steve Jobs, we've never seen another one like him, I think is a little bit missing the point, and I don't think he would even approve, because I think the real lesson you take away from a guy like him is that we all should compromise less. We all should take a more aesthetic approach to everything. We should value, the arts and quality, and see things through the lens of what we really would want to make in whatever business we're in, and not, it's so easy to compromise. And I know I do way more than I would like when I compare myself to Steve Jobs. So, I mean, I actually think not that there will be another figure like him per se, but that we all really should use his example as an inspiration. I saw O'Malley was talking kind of about this on TV last night, and I really liked the way he was talking about it. don't like say, oh, there'll never be another one and damn, no more innovation. That's not the answer. It's like, let's just make TechCrunch and Techonomy, you know, even better and not compromise with some corporate bullshit or whatever, you know?
I absolutely agree. I'm not a fan of corporate bullshit. Sure.
Am I allowed to say that word on
I think
a
so.
TechCrunch video?
Especially in this context, for
Thank
sure. So I know we were talking a little bit earlier, and you mentioned that you actually had a good anecdote during one of your interactions with Steve. So you want to?
Well, it's just the last time I saw him was, I don't know, whenever Ratatouille first came out, it was probably 3 years ago, roughly. I went to the premiere, which was at Pixar. Each year they would typically have a premiere of a Pixar movie at Pixar offices, which is a benefit for his wife Lorraine's a charity, which was to benefit East Palo Alto kids, and a wonderful work that she did. And I went with Benioff, who's a friend of mine, Mark Benioff, and we got there early. And Steve was just standing out in front of this big, beautiful Pixar building by himself, like just sort of standing there. And there were a few people had milled in, but most people hadn't gotten there yet. And Benioff and I both knew Jobs. And we just kind of got in this conversation with him. And we talked to him for like an hour. And the thing that was interesting is what we ended up doing was getting a tour of the whole Pixar building. And his pride, like he would show us the springs. The building has got this amazing earthquake proofing, right? Because of the computers and all. So the building is built on springs. And he was going around and showing us this, and then he took us inside and showed us how the trusses of the building are these big steel beams with rivets, the same kind that they used on the Golden Gate Bridge that are never done anymore. They're not like they're actually bolts, I guess. It's not rivets. They're, you know, and he was just so proud of all these uncompromising, again, construction elements that had created this gorgeous building, you know, and it's a vivid memory because, you know, his passion, again, like in every interaction I ever had with him, was just right out there on the table. You know, he wasn't always the nicest guy, but he was unbelievably passionate and always passionate. And so that Pixar building, because of his uncompromisingness and his passion, was as beautiful as any Apple store, and still is if anybody ever goes there. Or as any iPhone. You know, it's like everything he touched, he insisted on taking to the point of completion that most of us would be too lazy or distracted to achieve. And I just think that's the lesson he gives us.
And one last question. So I think we all, or certainly many people, including myself, who never really got to know him or interact with him too much on a personal basis, is there anything that we may have mischaracterized as far as like his personality, the way he interacted with people, that having met with him several times, that you think we might have gotten wrong? Just something that...
Well, I just think that, I actually think we've heard a lot of truth about Steve Jobs, but again, you know, there's sort of a hagiography that's been underway for the last, you know, day, you know, where he's being turned into a saint, and a lot of that language was kind of used when he retired from the CEO-ship just 6 weeks ago. And I just think that's not the way to think of him. I don't think he's that different from you and me, except obviously brilliant. His focus was very intense on whatever he did, and I think he was more uncompromising than we were, or than we are. I mean, I would like to be more that way, as I said, but I don't think he was that different than anybody, but he believed stronger. And he also... I think this element of the taste and the aesthetics is another one that is worth mentioning, and it is constantly mentioned, so it's not like it doesn't get discussed, but he believed in the importance of art, and he believed in the importance of design and art and personal expression, and he insisted on bringing that set of values to his business life. And I think you actually see that almost never in business leaders, and it would be so much better for the world if we saw that more.
I agree. Well, thank you very much. David Kirkpatrick, Techonomy, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Jason. Thanks a lot for having me.